to – go ahead.
And I think that's a product of what's happened across the AFC, whether it be based off of injury or just what teams have looked like through the first 3 weeks and what Baltimore did through the first 2 weeks and in portions of the game Sunday against Kansas City. They rightfully so have put themselves in a position where I think those of us that cover this league look at Baltimore as a team that could be right below New England and Kansas City. Now, there's some gray area there. There's a lot of teams that could fall into that category. I mean, the Buffalo Bills are 3-0, but what are they for really? And we'll find out a little bit about that on Sunday when they take on New England. So I just think that the stakes have changed a little bit, probably not inside the building because their belief is always that they can make a run and win a division and win in the playoffs. But for those of us on the outside, with Cleveland not looking like the Superman group that they were built in the offseason and looking vulnerable at times, then I think that all helps Baltimore feel like, man, that there's some things that can be grabbed here, but you still got to deal with New England and Kansas City.
Well, Evan, it is a season of hurt feelings, right? Like literally, like where the Steelers' hopes were all offseason, dashed. Where the Browns' expectations were, we'll see. We talked about Joe Flacco at 0-3, the Chargers at 1-2 and trying to get up the hill. The Titans and the Jaguars both had thoughts as well. I mean, there are some teams that really have gotten off to a bad start that you didn't see in the AFC, and the AFC feels really thin. And I don't know that we spent most of the offseason talking about such a possibility that are there 6 good teams in the AFC?
Because we didn't predict an injury to Ben Roethlisberger that would knock him out the year. We didn't predict that Sam Darnold would get mono and maybe come back week 5, but that's in jeopardy. We didn't see Andrew Luck retiring, even though the Colts actually looked pretty good. And the Oakland situation with Antonio Brown and then the Los Angeles Chargers with Melvin Gordon sitting out and injuries piling up with Derwin James and Russell Okung, their left tackle. So all these things have created a muddying of the waters below these top 2 teams. And I think if viewed correctly, that's a fun thing. I mean, that makes the next, 12 weeks really intriguing before you get into those final 2 weeks of the season. And one that I think Ravens fans should be excited about because they have a chance here to, in week 3, have seen themselves against one of the best and then prove themselves over the next 4 or 5 weeks and then take on the next. And then you sit there and go, all right, here's where we really stand.
Well, it's fun for you because you live in Baltimore, Evan Washburn. He is Evan Washburn, reporter, host, and analyst, CBS. What game you got this week?
I will be in Buffalo. That was what came to mind when we were talking about teams that are sort of surprising and are they for real. The Buffalo Bills hosting the New England Patriots. Both teams 3-0, and I was looking at it today. I mean, it could be arguably the biggest game in Buffalo in a very long time when you factor in they haven't been 3-0 to start a season since 2011. That year they went to the postseason. They never had a home game that had real impact in that regard. So I think it's going to be a wild scene.
And meanwhile, here come the Cleveland Browns, right? Limping in, bumping in. Here they go with expectations all over again. Were you ever on that train? I think maybe I had you on maybe in the spring, and I had a stock question for every football guest I had for 6 months here. Toward the end of the conversation, I'd say, well, we all know the Browns are going to win the Super Bowl, right? And that's just the way, I guess, modern media plays out when you go and sign a few superstars and you got a mouthy quarterback and there feels like there's possibility. Then you have to actually go and play the games. And the Browns have found that, once again, very, very hard to do. And here they come stumbling and bumbling their way in here where the Ravens could sort of torch their season beating them this week, right?
We follow what's interesting, Nestor, and you know that. You've been doing this a lot longer than I have. And I think that the situation with Cleveland is I don't doubt their talent. And I was there in training camp and spoke with a lot of those key players, whether it was Odell or players on the defensive side. I think they're just still figuring out, and I think Odell lent words to it last night, their identity. And that's a reality. And this is a first-year head coach in Freddie Kitchens, and he's got a lot on his plate. And I think it's going to be a roller coaster of a season. But up to this point, while it hasn't been as shiny and as impressive as maybe some predicted, I'm actually impressed they haven't. It doesn't feel like they've fractured to a degree internally. They seem to be, while people outside are now having fun at their expense based off of their lack of success, they seem to be galvanized by it. And I think that to me is important. I'm not ready to put the Cleveland story to bed, but I was also not there to say that it was just going to be a seamless trip right to the postseason and to a Super Bowl.
Evan Washburn prepared for all the conditions out in Kansas City, Missouri on Sunday. The rain, the hail, the wind, Toto, all that stuff was in play for sure out at Arrowhead. You can find him out at Evan Washburn, out of course on Twitter, and a part of things that go on here in Baltimore, in and around the Ravens, and Play 100 on Monday. And for the Ravens and expectations and where they are and the fan base and not winning a game that they were a touchdown underdog in, but covering for those locally who care about such things. Harbaugh doing these 4th and 1s and playing a different kind of game. And I know you're a baseball fan as well, and Astro Ball, and we've talked about Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal and the changing state of baseball here as the Orioles limp in at 110 losses. The Ravens have decided to do things not just differently with Lamar Jackson and the way they're going to run their offense, but really be a first evolver, first subscriber to whatever the money ball of football is about. That this is an organization very open to the analytics, very open to the fact that there is some science and some data available. And this is one aspect of any NFL team that goes aside from salary cap and those sort of financial obligations to say, this is a place you can muscle up and try to get a market advantage, try to get an edge that nobody else has. I don't know what it means when you go 4th and 1 on the 34-yard line other than you keep going or you don't, and the coach either plays the role of the village idiot, which Harbaugh's doing right now, but we're in the early part of teams looking at all of the science, and I say early, really in the first couple 5-10 years, and to Luke's point, and he's brought this out a couple times earlier this week, that the data is there, right, on the 538s and the ringers and people taking deep dive into the science of football. But then when you're standing there and it's 4th and a foot, and you realize if you don't make it, it's a 3-point turnover, literally, if you don't make that foot or that 3 feet or whatever it is, that coaches since the beginning of time would rather be safe and punt the football there. And John was sort of, almost flippant in the postgame, but not just sort of like, we've done the work and this is how we're going to play. 100 years of football be damned, sort of, kind of.
And look, you're right. There's still a lot for us to figure out, and I'm sure a lot for these teams to figure out. And if the Baltimore Ravens are going to be pioneers in the football side of this, then hey, that's fun. We get a front row seat for this thing. I've never had a problem with 4th down ones make sense to me a lot. I mean, I love the idea of just going for it on 4th down, especially once you cross that 50 field position. I know flipping fields can be massive in terms of what leads to success in a game, but so many times it feels like, man, you could grab those 2 yards. There's something about 2-point conversions though that I think. And again, I can't speak to the analytics, but just watching enough football, that's a really challenging area of the field. That's why red zone numbers are so impactful when you look at the success of a team. I mean, I remember covering the Pittsburgh Steelers the last couple of years, and they were one of the teams that were going for it too more often, and they devoted serious practice time to that condensed red zone area because every window's smaller. Everything's a bit more challenging.
Well, it's different between winning and losing, right? You make 3 plays anywhere down there and force a 3 instead of a 7. That's literally how you flip a football game. It's 4 points most of the games in the league that Vegas would have it there, right? Literally.
But specific to the 2-point conversion idea, that to me is it just feels like a riskier proposition. And unlike the 4th downs, you are, in all intents and purposes, especially when your kicker's Justin Tucker, you are risking not taking points. And when you go for it on 4th, whether you're in field goal range or not, those points aren't as guaranteed as they would be on an extra point situation, especially with Tucker. So it felt a bit odd, and I really only had a question or didn't understand the decision to go for the 2 when it was 30-19. I did not get why 9 points was better than 10. And it ended up being 11 because they did not convert the two-pointer. So everything else I was okay with.
Yeah, Luke spoke to this to the tie, playing to tie as opposed to playing to win, and they're
But
clearly
that's getting way ahead of it in that regard. I mean, you're still 2 scores from talking tie or win.
Oh, there's no doubt. And on the road, and just getting there and tying isn't good enough. Extending a game, you lose anyway. There's a lot of Vegas in play here. Evan Washburn, Baltimore resident and around town, and sort of ebbs and flows with some Ravens good tides here. And, it does sort of feel different, right? All of it. And I wrote last week about how the crowds have changed here and the support for the team after the knee and who's in the ballpark and all of that. But there really does feel like, and you talk about communication issues on the back end with Earl Thomas, this is the early part of the year where these things either gel or they don't gel. And the Chiefs made a lot of changes on the defensive side. Steve Spagnuolo, we talked about that all last week. But the Ravens really almost had a heart transplant around here when you consider Flacco, Suggs, Mosley, Weddle, right? I mean, that's an incredible loss there that if you could lose those guys and still win 10 or 11 games next year, you've probably done something around here.
And the defensive side, it just has not gotten enough attention nationally, I would say, and because there's just only so much you can talk about, and when you have a talent like Lamar that is so intriguing, that's going to gain our attention. But I thought leaving out Zadarius Smith is something you have to acknowledge too, especially when you look at the season he's already putting together with the Green Bay Packers. I got the decision; it was very Ravens-like. Whether it was Pernell McPhee a few years ago, you go way back, they often will not dump that much money into that pass rusher they built, but they could use Zadarius Smith right now. And I think this defense is worth watching over the course of the next few weeks here before they take on New England to see what kind of improvements they can make, especially on the back end, because the talent's there, but the thin quarterback group, and especially, and I was happy, or I was glad I was able to report it in game because it caught me off guard. But I was able to see, like, Marlon Humphrey's not on the field in those last 2 drives of the first half, and then you just see who's on the field for Baltimore as they take on and face a passing attack like Kansas City, and that's concerning. That's why Jalen Ramsey's name has been connected to Baltimore so much during these trade talks, because they could really use another dynamic corner. And then they also just have to figure out the things internally so they can take advantage of the fact they have Earl Thomas and Tony Jefferson, 2 of the better safeties in the league.
I'm sure Ozzie and then Eric and Joe Ortiz and John and everybody, they sit around, wink, and say, back end. I mean, for years, Luke wrote about the secondary not being good enough to go to New England and beat Tom Brady. In the aftermath of the Super Bowl, that's been the story every year. Jimmy Smith, Tavon Young, Marlon Humphrey. I mean, those are your big 3. None of those guys are on the field when Mahomes is running around at one point on Sunday. That's a lot of draft money, thought, effort, coaching, experience that you put into that to not have that out there when Travis Kelce's running around.
And it as we know, it's all tied together. And I thought Judon was all over the field Sunday, but I mean, at times he was a little bit too overexcited because penalty flags were thrown. But Judon to me is a I don't know if elite is a word, but he is a high-level pass rusher. But beyond that, it's tough to see where they're going to consistently get pressure. And this is football 101. That puts a lot of pressure on the back end. And so these problems, one has to solve the other. They either have to somehow find another outside linebacker that can match up with Judon and create havoc, or they've got to find a way to, one, stay healthy back there, or just be a lot tighter and more cohesive.
Well, and then the leakiness of the run game, right? And that was the exposure against a quarterback that has 2 skills and lots of skill players as well, that the running game became a problem on Sunday.
And that game had an anxiety level, especially for Baltimore in the second half, where every mistake is compounded by the fact that once you give Mahomes back the ball, you pretty much feel like he's going to put up 7 or put up 6 so the margin for error just shrinks out of the gate. And then based off of the hole they dug themselves, it felt, watching it and just thinking about the game back, that it was a situation where on both sides of the ball they were playing tight because they just knew how challenging it was going to be to even fight their way back. And that's where I do credit Lamar a lot and the rest of those guys, whether it was Seth Roberts or Willie Snead with his incredible catch. I mean, they at no point did they give up, but I think they realized, like, man, we made too many mistakes. And I made this point earlier today talking to somebody. The thing that I've really noticed about the teams that are year in and year out in the postseason or in the title game or the Super Bowl, and New England's at the top of this list, those teams find ways to not lose a game before they even worry about winning it. And that to me is a mentality that's worth adopting.
Well, and playing from a couple touchdowns behind on the road in Kansas City rarely has a happy ending. And even in a 5-point loss, the game never felt that close, right? I mean, for the balance of the afternoon, it didn't. Evan Washburn here, he is headed shuffling off to Buffalo with Buffalonians and undefeated chicken wings for everyone up there in Cheektowaga. Evan, appreciate you, man. Thanks for making some time. Sorry we did not cross paths. Certainly sorry I didn't have some barbecue with you. I have some leftovers over here if you need some. Okay?
You know where to find me, Nestor. Always good to be with you, man. Thanks.
You got it, Evan Washburn joining us. We got Baltimore Positive this week. We are moving back out into the county on Thursday. Howard County Executive Calvin Ball will be discussing education and all sorts of fascinating things about it. I learned a lot about Howard County in doing my math on all this. Don Moeller is going to be joining us from Baltimore County. Former Baltimore County Executive is my partner in crime, my longtime mentor, and one-time guidance counselor at Dundalk High School in the summer of 1982. It's true. You can find us at Baltimore Positive now, almost 60 episodes deep. You hear him here on the radio. This week, Brandon Scott, Baltimore City Council President as well as mayoral candidate, and former Baltimore County School Superintendent Stuart Berger. We will have John Sarbanes next week, Ben Cardin next week, Bill Ferguson coming up next month. Lots of great conversations ahead. Find them all at Baltimore Positive. I'm out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. Anywhere leftover barbecue can be found. I am here this week honoring head coach Brian Billick on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation, our head coach, and putting him in a ring of honor this week. It's going to be a great week here of memories, stories, storytelling. Marvin Lewis, Jack Del Rio, Mike Smith, Mike Flynn. Going to get some old school guys and some new school guys and some Cleveland guys as we get ready for the Browns, as well as Penn State this week for the Terps. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.